Good afternoon from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore. Welcome to the second session of ARC8 for the launch of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2013. My name is Miguel Pangalangan from the ASEF Education Department, and I am pleased to pass the floor to the Senior Manager of ASEF's Education Department, Ms. Reka, to officially launch the ARC8 Outlook Report 2013, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe.
Good morning in Europe, good afternoon in Asia. It's a pleasure to see so many of you joining us virtually and interested in the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030 on inclusion and diversity in higher education in Asia and Europe. In the next 10 minutes, I will introduce you to the story behind the report, the methodology, and the people who made it possible. About ARC first. ARC stands for ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education, also formerly known as the ASEF Rectors Conference and Students Forum. Despite its name, ARC is not only a conference, it's a 2-year project, a dialogue platform for policymakers, university and student leaders from Asia and Europe to connect with each other, exchange ideas, knowledge, and to take action towards issues of joint concern. Since ARC is not only connecting university and student leaders from the 2 regions, but also provides possibility to exchange and meet with policymakers and politicians from 51 countries, it has been recognized as the official dialogue partner of the ASEM Education Ministers meeting. So the mission of ARC is really to inform the ASEM education process, and through various outputs, such as research, knowledge-based products, policy dialogues, workshops, and activities, address the horizontal priorities of this process, which are digitalization and sustainable development. Through these, ARC is also contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. ARC is addressing a different topic every second year, and in 2018, it was looking at different ways how higher education stakeholders can take action towards the SDGs in Asia and Europe. And during this conference, we decided that the next edition, the next 2-year project cycle, should focus on inclusion and equity. This proved to be a very timely decision because the COVID-19 pandemic has reversed decades of process on inclusion in education, especially higher education, and exposed new challenges, but also new opportunities at the same time. So we hope that this report and its recommendations will serve as good food for thought for stakeholders, policymakers, and university leaders, and will enable them to put inclusion in the middle of their recovery roadmap. The methodology behind the report. So this Outlook report, it's not a conventional one. It's a result of a consultative process. We engaged 25 experts from Asia and Europe, representing student organizations, university networks, or higher education institutions themselves, who were meeting over a period of 9 months regularly. They pledged to add up their knowledge, experience, and expertise, review existing research on inclusion in different fields, reflect on trends, provide an outlook, and make recommendations to stakeholders. It was a 9-month process, only with virtual meetings, and we are very grateful to all of them because they did not only show up every time and brought their expertise to the table, but also their enthusiasm and kindness. So we feel truly blessed to be able to work with them. Later today, they will be at the center of the program and will be presenting the findings and the recommendations in the report in the different chapter discussions, so you will be able to meet them personally today. The structure of the report consists of 4 chapters. The first one is focusing on equitable access and success in higher education in general. The second one is looking at the relationship of inclusion and digital teaching and learning. The third one is looking at inclusion in international activities, especially mobility of people and knowledge, while the fourth one is looking at the relationship between inclusion and lifelong learning. Within each chapter, you will find an analysis of risks and report, along with an outlook on the future of inclusion in these areas in the next decade. Each report contains recommendations on how to enhance inclusion in higher education, one set of recommendations for policymakers, and another set to the attention of university leaders. As a closing thought, I just would like to reiterate that this conference, ARC8, is only a milestone in a process. ARC and ARC8 is actually a process which consists of different activities. We do knowledge-based products such as the Outlook report we are launching today, or I recommend you to explore our podcast series around inclusion. But another type of activity ARC is embracing are the policy dialogues. We are going to conduct one next week with the ASEM senior officials, and then later this year with the ASEM education ministers. Then we will be also organizing 2 capacity building workshops later this year. These are dedicated for university managers, professors, and students to come and join us and see how the recommendations of this report could be realized. So do join us in the process, not only today. We hope to stay in touch with you through our newsletter and include you among the first ones who get notified about the new opportunities coming up. I stop here now. Thank you so much for your attention, and I give back the floor to our Master of Ceremonies, Miguel.
Thank you, Reka. Certainly, we can now better appreciate the effort that the ARC8 experts put into the ARC8 Outlook 2013 report and the potential impact this has on higher education in Asia and in Europe. Before we go further into the findings of the ARC8 Outlook 2013 report, allow me to pass the floor to Dr. Graeme, who leads the National Education Opportunities Network in the UK, to set the scene and present an overview of the ASEM national.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Graeme, and I'll be presenting today on the 2021 ASEM Higher Education Equity Policy Study. This is the first study of its kind, bringing together data from nearly 50 countries across both continents, assessing the policies in place regarding equitable access and success in higher education. I will present this in a moment, going through the main findings and recommendations from this study, and hopefully there's opportunity for further discussion later on in the event. And also, if you want to continue dialogue with me, then at the end, please do try and make contact. We'll continue to talk about the findings from this very important and innovative and interesting piece of work. I'm now going to share my slides and run us through what we did, what we found, what we believe should come next. So, as I said, my name is Professor Graeme. I'm head of something called the Centre for Levelling Up, University of West London, United Kingdom, and director of the National Education Opportunities Network, or NEON, which is an organisation in the UK which supports widening access to education for those from diverse and different social backgrounds. What's the background? Well, this study aims to examine the approaches taken by governments within ASEM supporting equitable access and success to higher education. We did a survey of national policy in 47 ASEM partner countries. The cooperation in the majority of countries of representatives of government ministries, as well as in some countries higher education experts. So all the data collected here came directly via a survey from representatives from each of the 47 countries. We looked, as we'll see in a moment, what strategies are in place, where targets exist with regards to equitable access and higher education, and how they're being measured. And also, of course, it would be remiss of us not to look at what has happened in the context of the global pandemic. So before we get into the actual findings of this study and what actually respondents to our online survey from these 47 countries actually came back and said, we should a little consideration perhaps what we mean by equitable access and success. When we look at access to higher education, we're really looking at participation by students from all backgrounds. We know that the access to higher education, the numbers of students participating, both overall and as a percentage of any age-related cohort, differs greatly across countries. But that, of course, is that measure for all students from all different backgrounds, be they from the lower or higher socioeconomic groups, be they from all different ethnic groups, be they, of course, from both genders. What we're really concerned here is not so much of access overall, but equitable access and success. We're really focused on participation, not just in, but through higher education, not just getting into higher education. We all know what maths is not just getting in, but succeeding, achieving your potential. Looking at students who are either in a minority in a particular country or come from a disadvantaged majority. They may on average earn less or experience greater social and economic challenges than a minority population. We can all, I'm sure, think of countries where that's the case. What we do see is the challenges will come through as well in the study. When we talk about such groups of students, often but always underrepresented in higher education, we're drawing from a range of different categories. We're talking about those from low-income backgrounds. We're talking about those from different ethnic and religious minority backgrounds, those from sexual or gender minorities, or perhaps those are older students or from rural backgrounds. And what we also know is intersections between the identities of potential students is very important in shaping their life trajectory. None of us is just a male or female, man or woman. You are a man of a particular, or woman of a particular ethnic background, particular socioeconomic background, and also possibly with other characteristics related to our histories or individual natures. So we're looking at a very complex picture when it comes to who participates in higher education. One thing we do know, what makes the study so important, the available evidence tells us that across all countries of all different sizes, different educational systems, and different political systems, access to higher education is unequal by social background. It may be more unequal or less unequal in different countries, but there's no country yet that we found in our research, separate from this piece of work, where we see a situation where particularly those from, say, lower socioeconomic groups, the same chance of going to HE as those from higher socioeconomic groups. So that's the background. What are the key findings in our study? Well, firstly, we have a very positive finding, if you like. We found in all of the countries featured in the research, that in all the countries, there was some reference to higher education equity in a higher education government policy document. So there's recognition in all of the 47 countries that equitable access and success in higher education is an issue. We give just one example here for the Bangladesh Strategic Plan for Higher Education and the objective within it. We could have, of course, included many different plans and documents as examples. Broadly speaking, when we're talking about this reference, as you see if you look to the full report, we're generally thinking here about a reference in an overall policy document, possibly a higher education strategy for a country, or within the legal framework for higher education. In many countries, there's a set of legal frameworks dictating what higher education is or how it should operate. In many of those legal frameworks, there's explicit reference to the need for higher education to be open to those from all different backgrounds. However, again, as we said a moment ago, when we talk about the sort of groups that we're referring to when it comes to higher education equity and access, they're related to the nature of that particular population. What inequality means overall, be it by income or be it by ethnic or other background, differs across each individual country. As we see here, though, in this graph, the most common equity priority group mentioned by the respondents was a low income or socioeconomic background, but also disabled students as well, featuring in nearly all of the respondents. What we had in the study, just to make clear, is where we have 47 countries, we had 51 respondents. Particularly, that's because in the United Kingdom, but it is one country overall. The four nations of the United Kingdom each has its own particular higher education strategy. And there was a submission related to all of the particular nations. We go on to the next graph here, though. We started off quite encouraging picture with regards to the recognition of the importance of higher education and equitable access. What we look and see now is that while that's the case, we also find that in only a minority of countries, there's a specific higher education strategy. As we see, in only 16 respondents was an actual specific higher education strategy. In the majority, there's not a specific strategy related to education equity. That doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, that that's not a priority in that country. But of course, having a specific education equity strategy can be seen as an important aspect of a country's overall approach to its issue. We also see, when we dig down a little bit deeper into how countries are dealing with this issue strategically, we see that a small number of countries, there is a set of performance or performance agreements between universities and government. And you can see the example of those countries quoted there on this slide. We now turn to the sort of activities that have been delivered in different countries in relation to promoting and delivering on commitments related to equitable access and success. We divide here into non-monetary and monetary instruments. With non-monetary instruments, we see in the table, in the graph there, the most common non-monetary instrument to promote equitable access and success are preferential admission arrangements, often, perhaps sometimes, offering lower grade entry requirements for those particular social groups, and also outreach programs, where government will work together with higher education institutions to work with schools and often schools and those at pre-HE age on collaborative programs that can support and encourage students at pre-HE stages to develop better grades in school, understand more about higher education application, and often become more familiar with applying to higher education, as many of those more affluent groups be familiar with because of their own particular family backgrounds. Most common monetary instruments most are familiar with, I'm sure, are forms of scholarships. What we see here, though, is scholarships do differ. So one could easily do a separate presentation looking at how scholarships are organised and delivered across each particular country. Often, of course, they also related to merit. That's another interesting question to consider. You know, some are needs-based or needs and merit-based. So often they're the most able students, in particular certain equity priority group, who retain some form of financial support. We then looked at how policy is formed. Well, we asked respondents to indicate which organisations they consult when they form equitable access and success policy. As we see in the diagram, by far the most common organisation that governments and policymakers work with are education institutions associations. Also, quite high there is private sector organisations and employers feature quite prominently there, as do students. Very encouraging trends, these students are engaged as partners in this crucial area of higher education policy. Moving on to the next slide. When it comes to delivering policy, it's crucially important to see what impact that policy is having. Now, again, from a separate presentation on how data is collected on students, the student backgrounds across different nations. There are indeed some restrictions here. In some countries, it is culturally, legally, not permitted to collect information on the background of students, say, for instance, their ethnic background or often sometimes their economic background. Here we do see that in most countries, data is collected on students and they systematically and they progress to higher education. Only a minority of countries is data collected on students and priority equity groups. This is an important issue, and certainly going forward, one we need to discuss and think carefully about. Posting recommendations. Finally, before we move to recommendations, the impact of COVID-19. In the vast majority of countries, it was recognised that COVID-19 had a significant impact on what governments are doing in relation to equitable access and success. We give an example, just one example here, of the work that Ireland is doing. They delivered a significant amount of additional funding, particularly address issues such as the digital divide, which came up very frequently in respondents' answers. And we moved to a more online form of delivery. The key questions regarding the access to both hardware, to data, and support generally in terms of how students may deliver and experience their learning virtual. And certainly that was an attempt to address that in Ireland. There's a key question going forward as we emerge from the pandemic. How can we ensure that students from particular backgrounds are not disadvantaged by a permanent move to pedagogy and delivery and teaching and learning being online? So what are our recommendations coming from the report? Well, we have 6 recommendations overall. Firstly, production of specific strategies to address equitable access should be explored. Learning from where other countries have particular strategies. Schools and teaching unions, you may notice from our earlier diagram, we looked at organisations consulted with. Hardly any countries were consulting with schools. Clearly, if we're going to enable students from minority or disadvantaged majority backgrounds to progress to higher education, it's fundamental they are achieve the best grades they can in the school system. Monitoring, evaluation, and data collection, we mentioned a moment ago, crucial. And we're right for international collaboration and discussion. This is a tough area, and it takes investment to produce really high sophisticated data systems. And there's an opportunity cost issue there. But really, there is really need to think about, if we're going to really take equitable access work seriously, how do we know if it's working or not? The final 3 recommendations: non-monetary instruments and outreach work should be extended. There's some encouraging examples in the report from across different countries, across both continents, of work being done with learners prior to HE to support their progression to higher education. That could be expanded. And the final, I think, 2 recommendations relate to collaboration. It's clear that the policymakers across the 2 continents recognise this as an important and common challenge, like other aspects of education policy. Therefore, there's potential possibly to develop a suitable platform or forum via ASEM with the support of other appropriate bodies working in this space internationally to enable the sharing of practice and policy development. And supporting that, the continued collection of data of this nature on a biannual basis. We hope this report has made a real positive and important contribution to how we take this important area forward. We believe that there's particular potential to continue to collect data of this nature and collaborate together to use the best solutions in order to ensure that emerging from the pandemic, we do not have a more inequitable higher education system across the world and across the 2 continents we're working with here. We build equity into what we do moving forward. I look forward to hopefully having discussions with those who are in the session later on this issue, and hopefully, if one wants to talk to individually, or also individual discussions with those who wish to contact me via ASEF or look at the full report, happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. ATHERTON, for the insightful overview of the ASEM national equity policies. We will now have a 5-minute health break. Our next session focuses on the first chapter of ARC8 Outlook Report 2030 on equitable access and success in higher education. If you are on the conference platform, please visit the agenda section and move to the session on Chapter 1, Equitable Access and Success in Higher Education. If you are on YouTube, please stay tuned to this YouTube live stream. And last but not least, for all the participants who wish to receive a certificate of attendance, the letter for our ARC8 anagram is the letter S, S for Singapore. Thank you again.